Hello, students, sycophants, dorks, and anyone else watching. Welcome to the next live stream. You might be thinking, wow, it's really early. Don't we do this later in the day? Yeah, I typically do, but some things came up, so I just decided to do it a little bit earlier today. That's all. But you'll still get the same great content. Anyway, so today we're continuing chapter 4 of Counterculture with a more easy topic because it's not something so counterculture, but it is so vital to the gospel and to God, and that is orphans and widows. You know, with approximately 153 million orphans, 18 million kids without a parent or both, and God knows how many widows, it's no wonder why God cares for them much. These are the people most in need in society, regardless of country you live in. Today, we're looking at this simple but commanded and highly effective part of Scripture. So let's look at the command first. Think about it. Children without parents, or someone to care for them for that matter, are absolutely at the mercy of the elements. Without someone to care for them, many of these children get mistreated, neglected, trapped in a system that cannot care for them. They'll feel loneliness or abandonment. They get sucked into a life of abuse or sometimes slavery, depending on where they are. Or in a lot of cases, they die, depending on where they are. In other parts of the world, perhaps, or maybe even in the U.S., I don't know. And the same could be said of widows and the widowed. When we say widows, by today's standards, that means an elderly person by themselves, unable to care for themselves, their homes, without a support network, and most likely feeling a sense of abandonment. Now, in the Bible, this meant largely women, older women, but today we can include men in that because we might call them shut-ins or people that are stuck at home with no one to help them and the inability to care for themselves. So what does the Bible say about these people in need? Well, a lot actually, but I'm just going to pick a few verses. Deuteronomy 10, 17 through 18. It says, God executes judgment for the fatherless and the widow. In Exodus 22, 22, God commands his people to not mistreat widows or fatherless children. In Psalm 68, 5, we see that God is a defender of the widow and a father to the fatherless. But perhaps now that just gives you an idea of God's heart for those people. And just in case you thought, well, maybe that's just a polite suggestion, which would seem strange because if it matters to God, it should darn well matter to us, even more so. But just in case we were trying to dodge it, James 1:20 says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. You hear that? Religion, or faith if we prefer, that is pure is caring for orphans and widows in distress. Now, does this mean that it's the only thing we could do? Not at all. Not at all. I'm not saying that if you don't have a heart to go into children's ministry or any other ministry, you shouldn't. I'm not saying that if your ministry is in tech, you should push that aside and go right to here. I'm not saying that. You could do many things, but rather what we are commanded to say is, well, amongst the things you can do, this ought to be one of them. And this dovetails nicely with Ephesians 2:10. For he himself has, for God has created us to do good works, which he has prepared in advance for us to do. Now, again, that doesn't mean, so first of all, this doesn't mean that our only work should be orphan and widows. No, it just means it should be part of it. And two, this doesn't mean that pure religion doesn't mean salvation by caring for orphans and widows. No, that is certainly not the situation. Ephesians 2, 8, and 9, before we get to 10, makes it clear, for it is by grace that you have been saved, through faith, and it is not from yourselves as a gift of God, not by works that no one can boast. So even though this is not the path to salvation, it is the outpouring of salvation. So if we're supposed to do that, if part of our mission is supposed to be doing that, And however much or minor of that in God's plan for your life that is, if part of what you're supposed to do is care for orphans and widows, how do you do that if you're a young adult or teenager, especially a teenager? Because as an adult, you could all say to me, why don't you adopt a child? Okay, that's a good suggestion. But what if you're 16? What do you do? Thankfully, there's a lot you can do, actually. Let's go into some nuts and bolts here. Now, before I get into these nuts and bolts, let me make something clear. These recommendations or suggestions how to carry out this command are not meant to say that social programs in the state should or shouldn't exist. These suggestions are not putting the onus on the church and church alone to do everything so we could free up funds for something else or tax cuts or something like that. No, these are not meant to be politically charged. Rather, these suggestions are to say, regardless of what the state can or can't do, should or shouldn't do, we are supposed to do. So don't look at this in terms of the state ought to do it. Look at this in terms of we are supposed to do it no matter what. So let's look at an adoption. For a teenager, adoption is impossible. Let's just say it. If you're 16, you're not adopting a kid. I'm sorry, you know this. However, what you can do is talk to your parents about it if you feel God is calling your family to adopt. However, be open to the fact that your parents may say no because they can't do it for financial reasons, or there could be any number of reasons. So if you feel like, if you're thinking, well, I'll pray that my parents will adopt a child, go ahead and do that. And if God really wants your family to do that, the Holy Spirit will put that pressure on all of you. But be open to the fact that it might not be possible for your family. And that might happen. But on the other hand, if your parents do decide to adopt, be supportive and welcome your new sibling, because that's who they are. They've become your sibling. Much like Christ adopted us into his family, and we are now of his family, this new child is your family. It's not by blood, it's by love. For young adult, this adoption might be is just as unlikely as well. I mean, after all, adoption can be quite expensive. And plus, as a 20-something just starting out, I don't think there's a lot of agencies out there that would feel comfortable adopting to you. Not because you're irresponsible or incapable. It's just you're not necessarily in the situation they're hoping for. So that's probably not an option for you. But you can pray, God, is this something you want me to do later in life? And also, if your parents decide to adopt, you could take that route. Hey, mom, dad, maybe you can adopt. Or if they decide to, accept your new sibling. Same thing like the teenagers. Of course, for all of you, volunteering at an orphanage isn't always an option. It's always a ministry you could take up. For any youth members of the senior high ministry at 181 at Parma Heights Baptist Church, that's something you could go to PD about and say, hey, look, I'm really led. I think we should go try to help out in an orphanage. Pitch it to them. Pitch it to them. It could be a service project we look into in the future. Why not? It's not something, I guarantee you, if you pitch it to him, it's not something he's going to dismiss right away. He'll look into it. I can't guarantee you what'll happen, but he'll love the fact, PD and Matt, and myself included, will love the fact that you're thinking in that direction. That's the right way. We'll be so proud of you if you think of that. And we'll be inclined to work with you on that. And if for some reason the youth ministry can't do it at that given time or place, you can always volunteer to do it. Take a few friends. Why not? Call up the orphanage, find out, hey, what can we do? Fostering. Foster parenting is almost adoption. They don't live with you, but you do things with them. You take this child out of maybe a single parent home where the parent can't take care of them, or other situations like that. And you kind of live life with them. This is something, again, as a teenager or even maybe a young adult, this might not be in the cards for you at this stage in your life. But if you are, maybe, again, ask your parents if you could head in that direction. Or there's foster programs where you could get involved and go to activities and things like that. I'm going to include a link for a foster organization. Check it out. See what they have available. You might not have to bring the child back to your house. You could go to them. You could take them to events. There's options, giving them hope. The most likely thing, however, let's get to the most likely thing that you could do for an orphan or a child in need, a foster child in need, would be supporting a child. This, for a teenager or young adult, is well within your power to do. Uh, there are many organizations out there sponsoring kids. I mean, if you remember back to Winter Jam, when that was a thing before COVID, they always had this, which you might have seen in the thumbnail, Holt International. My wife and I sponsor several kids with Holt International, and we've done so for many years. We also support a child, something called Juna Amagara Ministries. I'll probably link that in the description below. And they are sponsoring children. So if that's something that you can do, consider using your allowance or job earnings or whatever you get your money for and sponsoring a child. Talk to your parents. Maybe they'll do it with you. Maybe they'll chip in. Maybe not. But that is the easiest way for you as a teen or young adult to support a child, especially if you want to support a child in another country, because it involves very little paperwork on your part. If you got the money and the will, they got the way. And plus, I can tell you right now, one of the nice things about, for example, like Holt, is they give us regular updates on our child. And when they're in a place where they no longer need our support, Holt automatically assigns us to a new child. And I do like that. I like that very much because I don't want to stop. This is a way that I can contribute to orphans and widows. Speaking of widows, this is even easier for teens and young adults. There are many in our community and church who are elderly, shut-ins. You don't even have to be elderly. It could be medical reason that they're shut-ins and just plain need our help. This can be with cutting the grass, cleaning the house, or just plain spending time with them. Teens, ask PD or Matt for a list of people in need at our church. They will be able to find this list for you in no time. In fact, they probably already have it. I wouldn't be surprised. And if they don't have it, give them a minute. They'll find it. If you're attending another church, find out from whichever person's in charge of caregiving and needy. They can produce the same list for you. This doesn't cost any money, usually, but your time is valuable. And remember, when you give up things to the Lord, there's time, talent, treasure. And time and talent are something you can give. I can assure you, keep it, because helping keep an elderly person at home is far better than sending them to a retirement community. Now, does that mean that by your effort you'll keep them out of the retirement community? No, I can't say that, because we do need retirement communities for medical reasons. But sending someone to a retirement community who doesn't need to go and doesn't want to go is unhealthy. If we can find a way to support that person in their need, why not do it? Absolutely. Again, I'm not saying that we don't need retirement communities or we should shut them all down. We need them because there are medical reasons that, incidentally, some of us are not capable of taking care of. But for someone who can pretty much do okay by their own in their own house, they just need someone to come by and help them out and spend time with them. That can be us. We can do that, and we should do that. Nay, we are commanded to do that. Yes, I said nay. So, and by the way, doing so, teens, helping the elderly or those in need and shut-ins, has the benefit of cross generations. I mean, we're going through Who Stole My Church right now, and imagine how it would look to the seniors of our church if they saw you serving them. That would go a long way to bridging gaps and helping to build new work for the church and cut through divisiveness. Can't be mad at the kid who's helping you. I suppose you could, but that would be a kind of curmudgeon that we wouldn't blame the teens for. So this was really an easy live stream, because at the end of the day, who's going to say what is so counterculture about helping those in need? There's very few people that are going to say that's bad. But however, we can say this. Even though it's more difficult for you to do this given your current life situation, it is still counterculture because it requires selflessness, which has never been in vogue. But for the godly, selflessness and taking care of those in need, like widows and orphans, is what we do out of desire to serve God.